He is one of the greatest and most faithful elves of all the First Age. His friendship with the men of Middle-earth would shape much of his life and his doom. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the life and travels of Finrod Felagund. Finrod was born in the year of the trees 1300 to his father Finarfin and mother Eärwen. He is the eldest of 4 children, including his brothers Angrod and Agnor, and his sister Galadriel, who was the youngest of the 4. He is born in the elven land of Eldamar in Aman. That same year, his cousin Turgon is born, with whom Finrod would grow very close. When his uncle Feanor leads the Noldor to rebel against the Valar and go into exile, Finrod is among those who oppose him. However, he goes with the Noldor in their exile anyway, as he wishes to not only remain with his friends, but he also refuses to leave his people to be ruled by Feanor. This decision would come at a great personal cost to Finrod. For Finrod loved the elf maiden Amarie, one of the Vanyar elves, who was not permitted to follow the Noldor in their exile, and instead stays in Valinor. We know that Finrod and his people do not participate in the kinslaying. They are actually traveling up the coast of Araman as Feanor's followers are sailing away, and Mandos appears, pronouncing the doom of the Noldor. In response to this, Finrod's father Finarfin forsakes the entire endeavor and returns to Valinor with many of their people. However, Finrod, Angrod, Agnor, and Galadriel, still unwilling to abandon their cousins, would lead the rest of their people on the long and dangerous march from the lands of Valinor across the Helcaraxe and into Middle-earth. The entire larger group is led by Fingolfin, their uncle and the father of Turgon. Among the possessions Finrod brings with him on this journey are a ring which he wears and some treasures from Tirion. Fingolfin leads the group to the very gates of Angband. He pounds upon the gates, but Morgoth remains hidden inside his fortress. Realizing they cannot defeat the Dark Lord in this manner, they turn back and come to the northern shores of Lake Mithrim. At this time, the Noldor begin establishing their various realms throughout Beleriand. Finrod travels to the island of Tol Sirion, where he constructs the Tower of Minas Tirith. One day, Finrod is traveling south along the river Sirion with Turgon. As they camp near the banks of the river, Ulmo travels up the river and puts them in an enchanted sleep. He tells each to prepare for a day of evil, when Morgoth would burst forth from Angband and destroy the armies of the north. He instructs them each to establish a retreat, where the elves may be safe from such an event. Later, Finrod and Galadriel are guests in the realm of Doriath. There they are welcomed by King Thingol and Queen Melian. Then Finrod was filled with wonder at the strength and majesty of Menegroth, its treasuries and armories, and its many pillared halls of stone. And it came into his heart that he would build wide halls behind ever-guarded gates in some deep and secret place beneath the hills. Thingol tells Finrod of a deep gorge at the river Narog, and of the caves under the high Faroth. Finrod, remembering the words of Ulmo, travels to the caverns of Narog, and establishes the stronghold of Nargothrond in 52 of the First Age. With the help of the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, he builds deep halls and armories. In thanking them for their help, Finrod gifts the dwarves with many jewels, which originated in Valinor. The dwarves in turn gift him with the Nauglamir and a new title, Felagund, meaning Maker of Caves. With his new stronghold completed, Finrod leaves his nephew Orodreth in charge of Minas Tirith. Meanwhile, Turgon, also heeding the words of Ulmo, would establish the hidden city of Gondolin, not far from Minas Tirith in 116. Over the coming centuries, as Angband is still under siege by the Noldor, Finrod would journey in the south of Beleriand. He becomes friends with Círdan, who at this time ruled over the realm of Falas. Finrod, once again showing his great skill, builds the Tower of Barad Nimras, overlooking the sea. After being in Beleriand for around 300 years, Finrod journeys east of Sirion. He goes hunting with Feanor's sons Maglor and Maithros, but soon becomes weary of the hunt and travels alone toward the Blue Mountains. He comes to the lands of Thargelion, where he becomes the first of the Noldor to come across men. These particular men are led by Beor, the namesake for the first of the 3 houses of the Edain. He views the men from afar, and he comes to feel love for these strange beings of Middle-earth. After the group falls asleep, Finrod walks into their encampment and picks up a harp which Beor had laid aside. He begins to play a beautiful music, the likes of which men had never heard. Initially believing they are in a dream, the men come to think that they have finally reached the far west, and that Finrod must be one of the Valar. Finrod stays with the men for quite some time, learning their language and teaching them the Sindarin tongue. When the Green Elves of Assyriand fear the men would destroy their home, Finrod gets permission from King Thingol and leads Beor and his men to the plains of Estolad, where they can create their own settlement. Beor, however, does not wish to part from his friend, and in 311 chooses to accompany Finrod back to the realm of Nargothrond. There he serves as Finrod's vassal until his death in 355 at the age of 93. The elves are perplexed by the mortality of their human friend, and when he lay dead, of no wound or grief but stricken by age, the Eldar saw for the first time the swift waning of the life of men, and the death of weariness which they knew not in themselves, and they grieved greatly for the loss of their friends. But Beor at the last had relinquished his life willingly, and passed in peace, and the Eldar wondered much at the strange fate of men, for in all their lore there was no account of it, and its end was hidden from them. The descendants of Beor would eventually migrate to the northern realms of Middle-earth, learning from and serving with the great lords of the Noldor. Finrod would develop a friendship with a woman of the House of Beor named Andreth. In the History of Middle-earth Volume 10, Morgoth's Ring, we find a lengthy and deep conversation between the two, regarding the mortality of men and how elves are bound to the world. This conversation, which takes place around the year 409, is a great summary of not only the nature of elves' lives, but also how men view and feel about death. It's a great read and I highly recommend it. You can see a lot of Andreth's fears regarding death taken to their extreme later in the Second Age, with the manner that Sauron corrupts the Númenóreans. At the end of their conversation, we discover part of Andreth's motivation behind feeling this way about death and the separation of elves and men. She and Finrod's brother Agnor are in love, but as the elves did not marry during times of war, it was not a consideration for them. Even then, Andreth's hair was beginning to gray, and she longed for them to be together. Finrod would leave Andreth with the parting words regarding her mortality and alluding to the second music, when the world would be remade and elves and men would be whole once more. Whither you go, may you find light. Await us there, my brother and me. Years later, in 455, Morgoth would launch the Dagor Bragolach, during which both Agnor and Angrod are killed, and Finrod fights in the fen of Serek. During this devastating defeat, Finrod is surrounded by orcs. As things look bleak for the King of Nargothrond, a group of men led by Barahir, a descendant of Beor, comes to his aid, saving his life. In thanks for this great deed, Finrod gifts Barahir with his ring, and swears an oath of friendship to aid in every need of Barahir and his people. This ring would come to be known as the Ring of Barahir, and would pass through his line all the way down to Aragorn, thousands of years later. In the aftermath of the Bragolach, Sauron captures Minas Tirith, driving out Orodreth and renaming it Tol Ingauroth. 10 years after the Bragolach, Barahir's son Beren comes to Nargothrond, seeking the help of the king. Having been tasked with obtaining a silmaril to win Lúthien's hand, Beren is determined to accomplish the deed. He reveals the ring to Finrod, reminding the king of his oath to his father. Finrod agrees to go with Beren, in fulfillment of his debt. Unfortunately, 2 of the sons of Feanor, Celegorm and Curufin, persuade the majority of the elves of Nargothrond to stay behind. Finrod has just 10 warriors who are faithful enough to go with him. He leaves Orodreth in charge of Nargothrond as his heir, and makes his way north with Beren and the company of elves. As they come to the Eredwethrin, the Mountains of Shadow, they come upon a company of orcs and promptly slay them. Taking their weapons and gear, Finrod uses his magic to change their physical appearances to look like the orcs themselves. Sadly, they are caught by Sauron when they attempt to pass the tower without checking in. They are brought before Sauron, and the Elven King fights the future Dark Lord with songs of power. He chanted a song of wizardry, of piercing, opening, of treachery, revealing, uncovering, betraying, then sudden Felagund there swaying. Sang in answer a song of staying, resisting, battling against power, of secrets kept, strength like a tower, and trust unbroken, freedom, escape, of changing and of shifting shape, of snares eluded, broken traps, the prison opening, the chain that snaps. Backwards and forwards swayed their song, reeling and foundering as ever more strong. The chanting swelled, Felagund fought, and all the magic and might he brought. Of elveness into his words, softly in the gloom they heard the birds, singing afar in Nargothrond, the sighing of the sea beyond. Beyond the western world on sand of pearls in elven land. Then the gloom gathered, darkness growing, in Valinor the red blood flowing. Beside the sea where the Noldor slew, the foam riders and stealing drew, their white ships with their white sails, from lamplit havens the wind wails, the wolf howls, the ravens flee, the ice mutters in the mouths of the sea. The captives sad in Angband mourn, thunder rumbles, the fires burn, and Finrod fell before the throne. In the end, Sauron's power is too great. He strips them of their disguises, but cannot determine their names or the reason for traveling in the realm. They all refuse to tell Sauron anything, and one by one, the elves are killed by werewolves in the dungeons of Galroth. Finally, when only Finrod and Beren remain, a werewolf lunges at Beren, but in that moment, Finrod uses all his power to break his bonds. He wrestles with the werewolf of Sauron and kills it with his bare hands. Finrod, having saved Beren from the werewolf, fulfills his oath to the line of Barahir. Mortally wounded from the fight, he dies in the tower he had built 400 years earlier. Luthien and Huan would come to Beren's rescue, driving Sauron away and laying waste to the walls of Galroth. As with all elves whose bodies are slain, Finrod's spirit travels to the halls of Mandos, but in the Silmarillion, we are told what happens to his body. They buried the body of Felagund upon the hilltop of his own isle, and it was clean again, and the green grave of Finrod, Finarfin's son, fairest of all the princes of the elves, remained inviolate, until the land was changed and broken, and foundered under destroying seas. But Finrod walks with Finarfin, his father, beneath the trees in Eldamar. Due to Finrod's noble actions during his life in Beleriand, and his reluctance to join the exile of the Noldor, he is reincarnated by the Valar after a short time in the halls of Mandos. After a life well lived, we are told that Finrod now dwells with Amarie in the land of Valinor. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. As always, a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible, including Tom DeBombadil 19, Gail Elizabeth, Jim Limber Davis, Sky Carcass, Salim Rahman, Smorzerk, Zetrock, Gimilcod, Debbie, Grand Strategy Nerd, Chief 40123, Mid-Earth Wellness, and the Dark-Haired One. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.